My name's Nick Cope, and I worked for the British government for 21 years at the Ministry of Defence. For 3 of those years, my job was to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon. There are some great cases in the British government's real-life X-Files. And by the way, I call them the real-life X-Files for a very good reason, because although my job was to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon, by default, anything strange that people reported ended up with us. So now, some things with a perceived connection with UFOs came across my desk. So I got drawn into the debate about alien abductions, crop circles, but also, just because there was nowhere else in government to send it, we got reports of animal mutilations. So this really was, in a sense, the real life X-Files. And I'm not using this phrase, the real life X-Files, lightly. I mean, I use it for a reason, and I think a good one. But there are some great cases.
When I was producing the documentary for television called A Strange Harvest, trying to get to the bottom of what was happening to all of these large and small animals, there was a newspaper article in Denver, Colorado, and it was about 2 cowhens saw what they said was about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, gray, humanoid looking, come up to a corral, and the being went up into the air, over the corral, down into the corral where they had cattle. And the 2 cowboys were stunned and they started running. And whatever happened so fast because one of the cows in the corral ended up being bloodlessly mutilated. And the only thing that they saw was this strange, small, gray humanoid. And because those 2 cowboys were in one of the smaller rural towns in Colorado, it made the local newspaper. And that's how I got to read it as Director of Special Projects at the CBS station in Denver. Now, a couple of months after reading that, I'm introduced to one of the important cases in history. It's referred to as the Cimarron case. And this was a case investigated by Leo Sprinkle, PhD. He got a call from a man named Paul Benowitz, who was in Albuquerque running the Thunder Mountain Scientific Lab there. And Paul Benowitz had taken his research into lights in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right to Kirtland Air Force Base and said, take a look at this. And I have film and I have photographs. And there are some kind of UFOs interacting over Kirtland, Coyote Canyon, and we have some sort of extraterrestrials. Well, Paul Benowitz began to be intensely interested, not just in the lights in the sky over Albuquerque. He knew that something was happening to people. And he began to start having people come to him, telling him about stories that were happening to them. And one of them was a woman that said that she and her son had been driving home to Cimarron, New Mexico. They heard the scream of what turned out to be a cow. She pulled the car over, she gets out, and she sees what she said looked like 2 blonde-haired men wearing some kind of plaid shirts, had a cow down in the pasture, and the cow was screaming at whatever the men were doing to the cow. She began yelling to these men, leave the cow alone, and lights showed up in the sky. Her son is frozen in terror. She remembers what happens next only in tiny pieces, has the impression that whatever this is that just suddenly came with light is somehow related to these 2 blonde-haired men with this cow down in the pasture. And that is why she ended up with Dr. Leo Sprinkle at the request of Paul Benowitz. Can you penetrate the amnesia, the missing time of this woman and see what happened? In the Cimarron case, I have the entire transcript of everything, of all the notes. And this was in May of 1980. And Leo Sprinkle called me and said, I have just done an extraordinary hypnosis with a woman and her son who saw 2 men, blonde hair, mutilating this cow. And what the rest of the huge hypnosis boiled down to is that under hypnosis, she recalled being inside of something in the air and was recognizing Las Cruces, New Mexico. And then, recognizing Las Cruces, New Mexico, she's down like that underground. And she described a whole variety of beings. There were very tall beings with chalky white skin. She said they looked jaundiced. They seemed to be in a pecking order of various types around her, maybe in charge. But there were others that were smaller and grayer, and they had red glowing eyes, she said, like red coals or red flashlight eyes. And she detected some kind of terrible hostility and thought that these beings were, to use her word, evil. Then there were others that were a lighter shade of gray, like cement, and they seemed kind to her. And what happened to this woman in this situation, from her recall, is that they did one of these vaginal stomach tests, perhaps taking eggs, who knows, she didn't understand, but she felt hurt. And after whatever this exam was, one of these tall, chalky, yellow-skinned beings seemed to try, in a strange way, apologize that it was necessary that they do what they were doing, without explaining to her what the necessity was. In this period of time, she tried to run away. Whether they let her run, whether it was a test, we'll never know. But she ended up in something that she said was like a huge underground cavern. Water was coming down on the walls like springs, and there was a pool, sort of a 30, 40-foot round circular kind of pool. And she found herself, as she ran, stopping because there was some kind of an edge, and that she looked down into what she first thought was water, and then realized that she was looking at the top of a very large, rounded gray head, and it seemed to be attached to a being. And in that water, she was seeing what she thought were organ parts, blood, all kinds of things, like a stew of organic matter around whatever this being was. And then she got a telepathic impression that what this being was doing was restoring itself as sustenance from the animal parts that were in the pool, and this being was getting sustenance from it. Then, a few years later, I get a call from a man in Missouri, and he says that he and his brother, back in the 1960s, were on their farm in Missouri when they see a round, glowing sphere of light comes down close to some trees. They had been having animal mutilations, and the two brothers stand there watching the beam come down into the pasture, and they see one of their cows going right up in the beam into this craft, and they looked at each other and they said, so the mutilations are being done by something from outer space. The montage of only 3 cases out of literally more than 1,000 are an example that maybe it is an insight to a whole variety of different alien types that are involved with some kind of a project on this earth, including the taking and mutilating of animals bloodlessly, and in many cases, not even leaving any tracks of any kind around the bodies when they are found on face powder dry dust. And that is where all of these beams that people have seen then come in and explain. How would you end up with a 2,000-pound bull on face powder dry dust with an ear, eye, tongue, jaw, genitals removed without any blood? So the beam technology is critical, and law enforcement knew that all the way back to the early 60s. And eventually, when people started reporting these beams, that was the technology that law enforcement concluded, yeah, we've got something that has the ability to pick up a 2,000-pound bull or a 1,700-pound cow or a calf or a newborn foal, as happened in Missouri. A 24-hour newborn foal in Missouri was found by its owner only about 500 feet from the front of their house with the same excisions as we have found in adult animals. And in that same farm in Missouri, they saw a silver disc in the pasture, landed, that disappeared like somebody popped off a light. And in another case, it was another one of the grays, humanoid, that was at the farmer's gate. He and his son saw it. And like so many of these cases, whatever this is, holograms or organic beings that have the ability to camouflage themselves, make themselves invisible. They're seeing the being, two humans, and then it disappears. Now that is the landscape of most of the non-human descriptions that I have encountered as an investigative reporter since 1979 when I started investigating animal mutilations. These different types that seem to be related to animal mutilations and seen in abductions. Adding to that are people who describe something like an 8-foot tall praying mantis. Many say that they glow in this part of their head with a soft yellow light. And then there are many people who have had live consciousness, just totally awake. One was a woman in Colorado, called me up to say, a day or so ago, I was out riding my horse. It was noontime. I had to go pick up something in another pasture. My horse and I have ridden together for years, and we come around a bend and my horse reared up. I thought I was going off to the ground. The horse was neighing. I knew it was something horrible. I'm thinking, what have I got here? A rattler right in the middle of the path. She struggled to get the horse back down. And when she got the horse back down, it was lunging forward while it was trying to veer off to the left. She thought she was going to be bucked off by her very, very well-known friendly horse. And there is around the turn, she could see there was a tree, and she got the horse to make the turn in the path. And she said, with God as my witness, standing about 8 to 9 feet tall, it looked like an alligator standing up with scales, with a snout, and that's what my horse was afraid of. And then I felt fear, and I pulled the reins back on the horse, and I got turned around, and I went back to the ranch house. And she said, I honestly was so afraid of what had just happened that I honestly did not try to call any law enforcement or anybody because I felt like nobody would believe me. So I'm calling you to tell you because maybe you'll have some answers. I didn't have answers, but it means that the list of what people are seeing, encountering, and trying to cope with in their human abductions and animal mutilations, the list is getting longer and longer with different types. As my work continued, people started coming to me with military experiences, military knowledge. They would be in the category of like whistleblower. And in those whistleblower comments was the first time that I began to get a possible insight about how complex all this was. It was a man who had worked in the Air Force, and he said that he knew for a fact that in some cases we were dealing with biological entities, and this is in fact is the phrase the government used, extraterrestrial biological entities. But he said that they also came to know for a fact that we were dealing with an advanced intelligence that could project holograms, 3-dimensional holograms. Suddenly, the pattern of these myriads of types, they began taking on a whole new meaning to me, that we could be dealing maybe with 3 major prime intelligences from someplace else, either in this Milky Way galaxy or even beyond, and that they work through all kinds of technologies that we would consider to be 3D holograms, clones, hybrids, cyborgs, androids, and that the prime intelligence with the agendas may not even be here. Humans may not have even interacted with the prime intelligences behind all of the phenomena on this planet for thousands of years, perhaps millions.
People talk about the variety of entities that they see. Abductees go on craft, they see little greys, they see mantis-type creatures, they see all sorts. So one theory is that they're all biological, and that just as you would find in, for example, a colony of ants, you would have different looking ants with different roles. So you would have a queen, you would have drones, you would have workers. I'm talking about hive societies where there's strict division of labor. So one could hypothesize that they're all biological and all part of the same species. One could then say there's a separate hypothesis that says it's different species collaborating with each other. And then you could have a third hypothesis that says that there's a sort of hierarchy and that some of them are robots with very specialist roles, but one of them, and you don't know which one, of course, but one is the controlling biological life forms, the one that made the other robots. But of course, you don't know which is which. And the final theory is that they're all robots, and that the controlling intelligence either, as I say, has gone extinct, and these are robots that are now striking out on their own, or that there is a controlling intelligence somewhere, but that it's either unseen on the ship or not on the ship at all and back on the home world. So there's a whole bunch of competing hypotheses here. And frankly, we have currently no way of telling which of these are more likely.
And once you get to that intersection of trying to understand who are we dealing with, what is their agenda, why are they here on this planet? I have talked with people who have worked in the CIA or the NSA or the DIA, and they say, if you're confused about the different types and what their agendas are, so are we. And many people who have been in Intel and retired have said, one of our problems is our work is so compartmentalized in order to control national security, but none of them are getting the whole story. And here begins this briefing for the President of the United States at Camp David, March 6 to 8, 1981. That was the first time in my experience that I have seen what I have been able to confirm from an inside Washington, D.C. insider who did work during the Reagan administration in Washington. When I said, can you find out if this transcript is real? Did Reagan go to Camp David March 6 to 8, 1981 with the director of the CIA and these various men from DIA, NSA, and other intel agencies? And after some period of time, I got back an answer. Yes, Linda, this transcript at Camp David with President Reagan about extraterrestrials is real.
I take the view that all presidents, all political leaders would have to be briefed on an extraterrestrial presence if that's what we're dealing with. Because I think it's one of those big strategic top-level decisions. Anything where the president would have to give an instant order to do something. You can't have a situation where they don't know about the thing. In the civil service, where I worked for 21 years, we used to call this the culture of no surprises. Simply put, you can't have a situation where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs bursts into the Oval Office and says, Mr. President, the situation with the aliens has escalated. We need quick decisions. Only for the president to say, what aliens? So if there is an alien presence, my view is that on day one, every president would be briefed on it. Every president would get that red folder. They'd be talked through it because they'd have to be. So I don't think it's not a party political issue. I've heard some people say, oh, well, Republicans get the brief, Democrats don't, or this president was in the know because he was an insider and this one wasn't let in. No, I think if it's real, everyone knows about it. And of course, you can look at presidents and see hints that have been dropped over the years, whether it's Reagan talking to the United Nations Security Council, whether it's Obama joking with Stephen Colbert, but there's a lot of hinting going on.
This transcript that was released in what is known as Project Serpo was made from a classified audio tape recording made at Camp David, Maryland, during a presidential briefing regarding the subject of, all caps, unidentified flying objects, and all caps, extraterrestrial visitation of Earth. When you get to who is there, are William Casey, appointed director of the Central Intelligence Agency by Ronald Reagan, who is introducing to Ronald Reagan, the new president, a caretaker. In the transcript, this is how the caretaker is introduced. Good morning, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to give you a bit of information on my background. I started the caretaking status of this project, meaning MJ-12 and all things alien, in 19 1960. 1947 is the official date of several crashes, because technology was definitely placed in the hands of American military, but they might have been placed deliberately in agendas by some of the non-humans to get us onto certain technology tracks. That was what the world heard about in terms of July of 1947. We know from other documents that by at least 1950-51, it was already decided that there would be a secret space program that would run in parallel track. The CIA would be the ones who really were pulling the strings on that secret space program. And when NASA was created in the early 1960s, it was created specifically to be under the management of the Central Intelligence Agency, which had the responsibility for the secret space program, because of the reoccurring crashes, appearances, mutilations, human abductions, that an alien presence on this planet was considered a significant question of national security threat. This caretaker says to President Ronald Reagan, "We have a special group of people whom we call Group 6 that care for all this information." Now, until reading this transcript, all of us had, since the early 1980s, been exposed to what was called Majestic 12 or MJ-12, who would help advise on the whole complex and difficult subject of an alien presence, extraterrestrial biological entities interacting with our planet, our government knowing it, but not knowing why, not knowing who, where exactly are they from, and why would they be doing what they're doing? If you start thinking about the fact that nobody really knew the answers to the questions, but it was automatically declared a potential threat to national security, they came up with an executive order and a policy of denial that from that moment on, no information about the alien presence was to be given to the public or the media. And they put these words in there, at all costs. When you get into the transcript as they are going through and they are explaining to President Reagan about the history going all the way back to the crashes and various projects and analyzing, they get to a part where the caretaker says, "Mr. President, the distance from Earth to Serpo," and they have identified Serpo as being the name of a planet that is in orbit around Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, a binary yellow star system almost 38 light years from Earth. Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 were specified by Betty and Barney Hill in the 1961 famous abduction case that was televised around the world eventually. So the caretaker says these beings can travel that distance of 40 light years in about 9 Earth months. And they can travel this great distance by means of space tunnels. They seem to be able to bend the distance from one point in space to another. How they do this must be explained scientifically. Mr. President, we understand very little about their propulsion system. There seem to be 2 different propulsion systems. One they use within our atmosphere and one they use once they exit our atmosphere. They do not have nuclear power. Their propulsion system does have some type of low-level radiation emissions, but nothing that would endanger us. It isn't like our radiation, but we call it radiation because we have nothing else to compare it with. Through all of the efforts and our learning that our government had known for quite a while, that in fact, the UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFO, unidentified flying objects, emit terahertz frequencies between microwave and infrared that our government has been studying since at least the 1970s, and knew that this radiation, this frequency of terahertz, could damage human tissues and manipulate human minds. But in this briefing to Ronald Reagan, the president asks, Are the laws of physics on their planet the same as ours? The caretaker says there seem to be a little different laws, physical laws, especially when it comes to the movement of their planet in relationship to their two suns. Our scientists do not understand it because it defies some of our laws of physics. And President Reagan asked the caretaker, have these beings landed in any other places on the planet? And then William Casey, the director of the CIA, and at that time would have been MJ1, he says, Mr. President, the Soviet Union has had their contacts with these aliens. We have a great deal of intelligence that would indicate the Soviets had their Roswell too. What they know is about the same as we know. They had some bodies back in the late 1950s, but our intelligence would indicate the species of aliens were different in the Soviet Union than in the United States.
There's no doubt that the UFO phenomenon is a global one. Having said that, in my experience, nations tend to handle this on an individual basis. There's very little exchange of information between allies, let alone adversaries. And I think the chances of there being just one other extraterrestrial civilization in the universe are as vanishingly small as the chances that we're alone. So when people say, what do the aliens look like? What do they want? I think it's a nonsense to suggest there's just two civilizations, us and them. No, if there's life out there, the universe will be teeming with life, and therefore it stands to reason that there'll be a large variety, both in terms of what they look like, their technological level, and indeed their agenda. For want of a simple way of putting it, good aliens, bad aliens. And the Copernican principle probably says that we're probably somewhere in the middle of all this in terms of civilizations in the universe. So as to what briefings would say on this, I think what I can say is this: any government briefing on extraterrestrials would be written in the language of threats and opportunities. The first question is there a threat? And if so, how can we counter it or otherwise mitigate it?
And the caretaker says, Mr. President, the 5 species of extraterrestrial biological entities are called ebens, archeloids, quadloids, heplaloids, and tronoloids. These names were given to the alien species by the intelligence community, specifically MJ5. The ebens are friendly, and the tronoloids are the dangerous ones. And then he says, the friendly ones are from planet Serpo. The Eben home planet is similar to the New Mexico high desert environment. So they start the context with the president that everything may not be so cool among these 5. However, we have little intelligence on 4 of the 5. We have plenty of intel on the ebens. They've given us everything that we have asked for. They have also helped us to understand the other 4 species on the list. And I am afraid to say, Mr. President, but we think one of the species is very hostile. And here, the director of the CIA, William Casey, jumps in. Well, Mr. President, we have intelligence that would indicate this one species of aliens have abducted people from Earth. They have performed scientific and medical tests on these humans. To the best of our knowledge, no humans have been killed, but the intelligence is from witnesses, and we haven't thoroughly evaluated this intelligence, but we have captured one of the hostile aliens. I don't think we are prepared to provide you with accurate answers to your questions about the potentially hostile aliens at this time. The president says, well, expect to give this to me as soon as possible. I want to know everything about these hostile creatures. Advisor number 1, do we have operational war plans on this? Yes, Mr. President, we have war plans on all potential threats to our country. We have absolutely no evidence that this particular alien race, and they're referring now to the ebens, has any intent to attack the United States of America or planet Earth, but it also implies that they do not think that the hostile ones are going to attack.
We see the idea of alien invasion in all sorts of science fiction movies and TV shows, but I think the reality is somewhat more different, complex, and maybe it's not quite as good news, as all these sci-fi movies would have us believe. Any civilization with the technology to have developed viable interstellar travel in a situation where we can only just about get probes to the moon and Mars. The levels of technology are orders of magnitude above anything we've got. And you look at a technological gap in human history. For example, the Western explorers and conquerors, exploiters, interacting with native indigenous peoples. And it's literally bows and arrows against ships that travel the oceans and guns. So if that's a technology gap of, I don't know, just a few hundred years, what does a technology gap of a few million years look like? And that's likely what we'd be dealing with in a universe nearly 14 billion years old. There might be civilizations out there with a billion-year head start on us. Well, do we really think that we could turn back the tide of an alien invasion if that's what we were facing? No, I don't think so. I think the only thing we can hope is that anything that they would possibly want from us, they could get through other means that don't involve destruction. And one would hope, perhaps, that with a greater degree of advancement came greater moral authority, altruism, all of those things. But these are debates for evolutionary biologists, I suspect. And I think pretty much all we can do is hope. Because frankly, if we were facing an alien invasion, I don't think there's much we could do about it. So we just have to hope that they're friendly.
There is no way we can control visitors from outer space. Some astronomers find it difficult to believe that these aliens can find Earth. Well, we are on the outer reaches of our galaxy. Our sun is one of hundreds of thousands of such stars within our galactic neighborhood. But the Ebens found us. They found Earth. And we are not the only country on Earth that has been visited by the Ebens. As for the other 4 species, we know that they have visited us in the past and that they will visit us in the future. We are like a petri dish inside this universe. Things watching us on this planet, experimenting. I've been told this before by others. Earth is perceived as a big laboratory for a variety of non-human intelligences from other places in the universe. We are a diverse planet. We must be very interesting to other extraterrestrials. Maybe they broadcasted that Earth has intelligent life. Maybe that is why we are being visited. And then, advisor number 1 says, our intelligence gathering stations inside and outside of the Soviet Union picked up voice transmissions between Soviet air defense pilots and ground controllers regarding a number of UFOs which were being chased by Soviet pilots. The Soviets attempted on 2 occasions to shoot down the UFOs, but to no avail. And we think these UFOs were the hostile ones. We call them hostile because they tend to land, take humans, conduct experiments on them, and then release the humans. And their spacecraft are different in design than the Ebens. The president asks about the differences, and advisor number 1 said, we know the difference between the Eben spacecraft and the hostile alien spacecraft. We have a lens-shaped disk, and it gives off this Hertz signal. We have a round spherical disc, it gives off this signal. We have a triangle, the cigars, the ice cream cones, all these different shapes, and was saying, we track these. We have satellites, they track the comings and goings of Hertz frequencies that we associate with various types of non-human intelligences. The challenge is to know that this frequency in this shape actually goes to Ebens, because apparently you can have some of these non-humans collaborating with each other, even though the implication from a lot of the whistleblowers is that they know that there is an Earth secret war, that they know that there are alien intelligences that have been fighting each other for millions of years, and that whatever is happening in the 21st century is a legacy of a secret war that clearly our government does not fully understand either. Now, the caretaker goes to what is behind a threat. Mr. President, we do have hostile aliens. We refer to them as HAVs. It means hostile alien visitors. And the president says, well, these HAVs, they've been visiting us and kidnapping our people since the 1950s. William Casey says, Mr. President, we have indication that they might have been doing this for some time, but we can be sure that the Ebens have never done this. They are extremely peaceful and would not harm a living soul, including animals. When I read that paragraph, I remembered distinctly a husband and wife in a car, Thanksgiving 1980. And when they made the turn off of the main freeway onto the highway, they both at the same time turn because they both see a blast of light going against the windshield but from behind. And when they turn, they are in what they both agreed upon was a beam that was a cerulean blue. The wife said she's looking down on the ground, terrified because they're rising up above the trees. They're literally moving in this beam, and they end up coming down in a forest. And where they came down, they could see what looked like a shape like this. And there were erector set legs, as the husband said. The wife said it reminded me of an old antique bathtub. And they see the side of this craft open, and there is a man with a bald head, large cranium, coming down to sort of a narrow chin. He is wearing a blue cape to the bottom of his feet with a big collar that comes up. And the wife immediately says, I felt so attracted, like this was somebody really special. And as she's thinking that, they both find themselves right there, like they didn't walk, like nothing, they were just to where this being in this big blue cape is. And just like so many people in the abduction syndrome, they only remember pieces. It's like trying to put a puzzle together. The husband knows that he's taken one direction, the wife is taken another direction. And where the husband is, he draws illustrations of the being that he is now dealing with inside the craft. And he calls this being a creep. Well, here is the puzzle, that in this particular case, they took the husband one place, they took his mind out, they took the woman to another place, they did vaginal and stomach probes. She was screaming and crying and kicking. And when they were taken back out of their two different experiments, she came into a hallway where there were a bunch of beings down on their knees. They were moving down as if bowing to her as she came in. And she said, I was so angry. Maybe they don't understand humans. But what they just did to me, and they take me down a hall, and if they're bowing to me because this is the way they are apologizing, they can take their bows and you know what they can do with it. She said, what right did they have to take my husband and me in a car off of a freeway? What right did they have to come and strip my clothes off and put me on a table and do whatever they did and then act like everything is okay? Because they're doing a theatrical lineup in a hallway that they walked me down in which they are bowing to me. I've always thought of her words as being one of the perfect summaries for why people in the human abduction syndrome don't trust anything about the alien presence that they are involved in. So when this man says to President Reagan back March 6 to 8, 1981, that they know that the Ebens are not a threat, that they know that they are our allies, you can't help but wonder who is kidding who here. But at least they go on to go into now names of 5 that they say that they have working knowledge with. Reagan, you can hear him say this. Well, my God, just knowing we have names for these things are amazing. Which one did we capture? Mr. President, we have a trontoloid, but it is dead. We captured it in 1961 in Canada, and we had it in captivity until 1962 when it died. The caretaker says, in an answer to the president, saying, I think I was briefed on sensitive military installations in February, and what about that installation west of Las Vegas? And the caretaker says, well, Mr. President, we call it the Groom Lake Complex. You and I and the world know about it as Area 51 S4. The president, is that the same place that we have the Soviet fighter jets? And the idea there is that the Soviets have some of our stuff, we have some of theirs, just like the aliens crashing and we trying to back engineer their technology. Yes, Mr. President, it is the same place. In order to protect all of this information and the fact that the United States government has evidence of our planet being visited by extraterrestrials, we developed over the years a very effective program to safeguard the information. We call it Project Dove. It is a complex series of counterintelligence, disinformation operations by our military intelligence agencies to disinform the public. As you know, Mr. President, we have some highly classified aircraft. In order to keep these aircraft secret, we tend to convince, at times, the public and the press that maybe UFOs are real in order to make the public think what they are seeing are actually UFOs instead of our own secret aircraft. Even though we know maybe some of the sightings are actual UFOs. And then the caretaker in this last section, which would have been the third day, tells Reagan a story about how they retrieved a live extraterrestrial biological entity from a crash site. And he says, when Eba was alive, he showed us two devices. One was a communication system and one was an energy device. The communication system did not work without the energy device. Eventually, a scientist from Los Alamos figured out the two systems and connected them. After Eba died, we were able to send transmissions to Eben someplace out in space. And that Eba built up a strong friendship with a U.S. Army major who was his guardian. I have had communication with the person who stayed with this Eben, and that two of the most important statements is that Eben who lived at Los Alamos from 1949 to June 18, 1952, when it died of unknown causes. He said there were daily filmings. The Eben was telepathic. The Air Force man who could get the telepathic download would sit in front of a film camera on a daily basis. The man would talk to the camera, and that they did this for approximately nearly 3 years daily. But that film of the man who helped retrieve this live Eben from a crash in the Roswell region and lived with it at Los Alamos, New Mexico, between 49 and June 18, 1952. That is the kind of film that we all should be able to see. And whether Ronald Reagan was ever shown that film, it doesn't talk about it here, but they say we could send and receive information with the Ebens. We finally received a startling message. They wanted to visit Earth. They wanted to retrieve their spacemen bodies and meet with Earthlings. They provided a time, date, and location. However, the date was about 8 years in the future. Our military figured something was wrong, and that maybe the Ebens were confusing Earth time with Eben time. After a long series of messages, it was determined that the Ebens would land on Earth on Friday, April 24th, 1964. And I was told that on exactly this date, that a meeting was being arranged through Project Sigma with MJ-12, that the Ebens would go to a prearranged landing site, and they were going to exchange bodies, and they were going to exchange technologies. And here was the part that was so surprising, and yet it seemed so logical at the time. Everybody knew and had heard about the policeman down in Socorro, New Mexico, who on the night before had had an encounter. He was in his patrol car, and he sees what looks to him like something that is white, like an egg, out in the desert, and he stops his car, and he's going to get out when, around this egg kind of craft on some kind of struts, he sees what he said looked like two little children. And they looked to him like they were dressed in snowsuits, and they came down out of this egg craft, and they got to the ground, and he simultaneously is getting out of his police car, and as soon as he starts walking, the two childlike figures hurry right back into this white egg, and this egg took off with burning something. It looked like blue flame. That's the famous site that the astronomer J. Allen Hynek then went to, took a team of people. They gathered samples from where they found carbon burn on the soil, and that Lonnie Zamora went down in history not knowing that what he came across was a communication mistake in what is known as Project Sigma. Our government was trying to learn how to communicate to the Ebens and vice versa. And they had intended that this would be a 6 a.m. meeting on White Sands. The mistake threw things to 6 p.m. the day before to the west. And they recommunicated through Project Sigma. They reconnoitered and understood their mistake. Then the next morning, they had this meeting that is being described in this briefing. And they say that when Reagan is asking questions about that and they're explaining that they exchange bodies, they exchange technology, they're talking about how the Ebens have helped them and been friendly, even though I know and have just explained to you that those were clearly Ebens in Colorado and Longmont. That means Ebens abducted that couple in Colorado. So where is the line here about ally and trust and friendliness, and something that is perhaps not really an ally may have a completely secret agenda, and none of us really understand, including the government, about what the big picture is here? And the caretaker says, Mr. President, the hostile alien species is the one responsible for abducting some humans. We can clearly prove some 80 Americans were abducted from about 1955 until the present. We have a special military intelligence unit keeping track of these abductions. We have FBI agents attached to assist us when needed. We have the National Security Agency and in some instances, the CIA personnel help. Unfortunately, we do not have the technology to know when these hostiles will abduct. We get the information afterward. We interview the victim and place them under hypnotic trances. Some of the victims remember the entire event without hypnosis, while others need hypnosis to relate what happened. We haven't found a single death directly related to the hostile aliens yet. We have recorded 5 suicides related to human abductions. But Mr. President, these are the abductions we know about. We have no idea how many other abductions are occurring in this country or around the world. These hostile aliens are sneaky. They seem to appear and disappear, which is beyond our technical understanding. We have a classic abduction incident that was recorded by military intelligence personnel. It happened in 1979 near a military base, and the president wants to know where. And the advisor says it was in New Mexico, and the caretaker says, New Mexico is similar to the home planet of the Ebens. Since we do not know which planet the Trontoloids come from, the ones identified as hostile alien visitors, and Casey, the director of the CIA, interrupts. Well, sir, I think the Ebens gave us that information. We know that the star group, it is close to our solar system. It's maybe 10.5 light years away. They are actually closer to us than the Ebens are. And where he is referencing is Epsilon Eridani. So now we're learning in this briefing a bigger breakdown on some details that they know about these Trontoloid hostile alien visitors. Mr. President, their technology is probably 1,000 years more advanced than ours, maybe even more. They have different materials to work with. Some of their materials are not found on this planet. Advisor number 4, yes, Mr. President, we found many metals and other things that are not found on this planet. Maybe they have more than 104 elements, or maybe they are different than ours. Mr. President, this goes for each species, although the Ebens do have similar elements as those found on Earth. But the Trontoloids have strange materials, nothing like those found on Earth. These hostile alien visitors, these aliens, can imitate blonde humans. However, they are not blonde. They are ugly-looking insects. And the advisor number 4 says, I can assure you, they have the ability to change their bodies. As I said before, they are 1,000 years ahead of us in technology and probably every other science. And the president said, can they be killed? Advisor number 4, Yes, they are just flesh and blood like a human body. They can be killed, but their spaceships have a force field around them. They can be shot down, but it takes some doing on our part. We have to use a small-style nuclear missile to shoot them down, but we haven't actually done that yet. We have experiments in Nevada on the captured craft that we have of theirs. That if we had to shoot them down, if a group of them attacked us, and the president asked, well, is that likely? Advisor number 1, I don't think so. We know, or we can recognize their language, which is entirely different than the Ebens. They use a very high band radio system, but they have different frequencies, and it is difficult for the National Security Agency to track them. And they say, well, our defenses are as best prepared as we can be against any form of an attack by this group. We have a system to cover any threat. And the president says we have a war plan, and they answer, that is enough for today, Mr. President. And that's the close of the briefing.
Obviously, the United States government and governments all around the world have a wide range of war plans, conflict plans for a range of scenarios, and there are all sorts of resources and capabilities, some of which are known, some of which are not known. Everything from surveillance satellites and deep space tracking radar systems through to obviously nuclear weapons, directed energy weapons, chemical and biological weapons, and a whole lot more. As I say, some of which people know about, some of which they don't know about. And I suppose any of this could be reconfigured to meet an extraterrestrial threat. But as I say, let's hope we don't have to do that. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, because frankly, it would be just bows and arrows against stealth fighters and directed energy weapons in terms of the capability gap. Look, aliens aren't going to be coming here to steal our water or gold, that sort of thing. I mean, any civilization with the technology to travel between the stars can probably figure out ways to get water and gold and pretty much anything else it wants without resorting to conquering other civilizations. Now, with the abduction reports, one hears consistently these stories that some sort of hybridization program, a breeding program, the harvesting of genetic material. I don't know about that. All I can say is, again, one would hope that A, this sort of thing could be obtained by other means, and B, if not, permission could be asked and that we could trade rather than just have something stolen from us. And to use an analogy, maybe the farmer doesn't consult the cows about moving them around between the fields too much, and maybe that's the technology gap. Maybe that's the level of void between us and any visiting extraterrestrial civilization that we're dealing with. But this is speculation. I like to think that if we're being visited, we're being, I suppose, studied almost in an anthropological way, that human beings as biological entities, but also the structure of our society, our social systems, is of interest. And that, one would hope, wouldn't need medical examinations and samples being taken.
These are the kinds of questions that haunt a lot of us who have been trying to get to the bottom of the truth of the alien presence on this planet for a very long time. Why is it that the government stresses certain directions of research? Why is it they block other areas of research? And when it comes to what are the specific details about the alien presence broken down into a taxonomy that we on Earth deserve to understand, clearly there is still manipulation, there is still censorship.
People speculate about disclosure and they ask when it will come. And if you view disclosure as a single event, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone, then yes, I guess you can have that debate. But I view disclosure as more of a process. And I think we're right in the middle of that process. We've seen in the last 3 years, this subject has transitioned out of the fringe and into the mainstream. We've seen the story on the front page of the New York Times. It's in the Washington Post, Politico, The Hill. It's on all the major networks. We've seen the release of 3 videos of US Navy jets chasing UFOs. We've had it confirmed that the US Navy says this is just the tip of the iceberg and that there's a series of ongoing incursions into restricted military airspace, so much so that they've issued instructions to their pilots on what to do if they encounter these things. Although they've not said what those instructions say, that remains classified. We know that there have been congressional briefings on this in both the Senate and the House, and Services Committee, Intelligence Committee, various senators on the record saying they got the brief, the president on the record saying he attended a short meeting on this. We know that the Senate Intelligence Committee put in the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021 a request for the Director of National Intelligence to produce a report on the phenomenon. And we know that the Pentagon has set up what they call a UAP task force, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, to look into all this. None of this is disputed. It's all on the Pentagon's website, various senators on the record talking about this quite openly. Not the details of it, of course, that remains classified, but the fact that this is happening. Well, this is a sort of disclosure, isn't it? 3 years ago, if you'd contacted the Public Affairs Department in the Department of Defense and said, what's your line on UFOs? They would have said, we don't have a program. We're not interested. No one's looking at this. Well, now, as I say, we've got all these things happening at once. And so we're slap bang in the middle of this process. And there's more to come. Now, there are risks and opportunities here. You might say, well, there'd be huge advantage in being, I suppose, the disclosure president or the nation that first reveals this. You'd cement your position in history. And on the surface, it sounds good. But what if the reality of what's being disclosed isn't that pleasant? Then you just become the person bearing bad news. And it's worse than that, because it's not just my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. It's my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone, and we've known that for nearly 80 years, and we've lied and lied and lied. So the day after disclosure, I can tell you this, when whoever does it is basking in the reflected glory and considering their place in history, the awkward questions are going to start. Well, that's great, but when did you know about it? And why didn't you share it before? And wait a minute, what's the agenda here?
Our universe is teeming with other life. It's way past time that we were introduced to who, why, and from where.